I'm a family court judge, so most of the parents I see in court are separated or divorced from each other, and most of those people have gone on to form new relationships with new partners. It looked so easy on the Brady Bunch, but real life can be very different. On today's program, the issues and challenges that can arise in remarriage after divorce.
Brought to you by AdviceScene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
It did look so easy on the Brady Bunch. A remarried couple and the weekly shenanigans of their blended family. Our guests today tell us that real life can be very different. What are the potential obstacles to achieving a lasting happiness the second or third time around? What are the pitfalls and special needs of people who are contemplating or already in a new relationship, especially if there are children and ex-partners in the picture? Joining us in our discussion is Paula Bisaker, who's the founder of RemarriageWorks.com, which is targeted to people in subsequent relationships and what she calls step-family living. And also with us, Karina Saka, a family law lawyer with loads of experience providing legal advice and assistance to parents in blended families. Welcome both to Family Matters. Thank you for being here. Paula, I understand that your personal situation was what prompted you to build a career out of helping people in the same circumstances. Yes. Can you tell us a little about your situation?
Sure. Formerly, I had been an analyst with the Department of Defense for 19 years, and I had been divorced with 2 children. And I met a gentleman who had been a widower with 3 children. And I started thinking, when I got all the bridal magazines, these really do little for someone in my shoes. And then once we married, I thought, you know, there's even less resources available for blending stepfamilies.
And so you created a service that helps people who are going through the process of trying to blend a family. And of course, part of that, Karina, involves legal advice.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many issues that come up with blended families, whether we're looking at step-parent adoptions, whether we're looking at conflict between the siblings, or even support issues that arise. It's definitely an interesting area.
For sure, and probably one that isn't discussed a whole lot. I looked on your website, Paula, and you said that there are unique and often unspoken issues that remarrieds face daily. What is it that's unspoken?
Sure. One of the challenges is that people, when they're getting remarried, they see it as a second chance for happiness. And it's very difficult to project what the challenges are going to be. So one of my main goals is to have people go in eyes wide open. So those areas are legal matters, of course, financial aspects, relationship aspects, even just down in the weeds, daily living, discipline, chores, parenting styles, dealing with exes, dealing with extended family. The issues go on and on.
Do you think, and Karina, I'd be interested in your views on this too, are the needs of widowed people different than the needs of people who are divorced?
I think in some ways yes, and in some ways no. With widowed people, you may have issues around pensions and around how they'd be treated now that they're spouses, but you still have issues of blended families, children, perhaps another mother or father that they need to now be getting along with and having potential pitfalls with. So in some ways I think the situations are similar. What
do you think, Paula?
I think that whether you're divorced or widowed, you're coming in and your children are coming into that remarriage and that step family with baggage. Everybody's coming from a place of loss.
Is it usually bad baggage? Sad
I think
baggage?
There's a lot of it. I think there's a lot of it. And I think a lot of people get remarried and they think they're ready, and maybe not everybody's dealt with the grief.
No, and oftentimes I find that the same patterns can be repeating themselves, or I find that what my clients haven't experienced or didn't foresee is that they'd have similar issues with the ex-partner. So they might now have another mother to deal with or another father to deal with, and similar patterns might emerge.
Well, what's interesting about your situation, Paula, is that your family has both. You have a divorcee and a widower. And, you know, as a family court judge, I see people who are dealing with their exes. I would have thought, from where I sit, that it's easier to get involved with someone who's a widow or a widower because there's no ex in the picture. But listening to you both, it sounds like it's not quite that simple.
Right. I don't think it's easier. I think it's different. Yeah. For example, even starting with the wedding day. When we got married, my husband had invited, and I agreed, let's invite your first set of in-laws, because there was no broken relationship there. So they came to our wedding. Well, at our wedding, I didn't expect that would actually trigger grief in them. So in the receiving line and everything, and it's just something that I hadn't thought about, hadn't expected, and of course it was a very natural thing to happen.
Well, had you met them before the wedding?
I had met them briefly a couple times, during kids' graduations or kid events, but didn't know them real well. But of course, I mean, just imagine you're coming, it had to trigger some emotions for them with their son-in-law getting remarried.
I guess I know it was quite a process for you. I want to show our audience, you've written a journal. It's actually a book that people can buy, and it's a journal for stepmoms.
Yes.
And I wondered why stepmoms and not stepdads, because I know Karina and I see lots of stepdads too.
Right. Well, you bring up a very good point. There are very few resources for stepdads in particular. As a matter of fact, I'm only aware of 2 books recently that were published just for stepdads. One of them is called The Smart Stepdad, and that just came out this year by Ron Deal, and I recommend that book. The Journal for Stepmoms is really a format where many counselors and therapists recommend journaling to grow and self-growth, development through emotions. And
you have to kind of write down what you're going through, and like a diary?
Right, yes. And one of the things I discovered in some of my research and polling from our website was that women are more apt to journal. So that's why I chose that topic. But a lot of men are asking, so if I hear from people that the men want to journal, I'd be happy to pull together.
You know why I think that those stats may not be right? Because a lot of men have blogs. And a blog is a form of a journal. It's an expression of yourself that you're putting out there. I think, though, this journal's for yourself, though, not for... Is it something you share with your family?
No, it's, like a personal journal diary, something that you would keep for yourself.
I want to ask you a question that came, it was mentioned to me by another guest that we had on our show, Deborah Moskovich. She told me that the breakup rate for second marriages is actually higher than first marriages. I was surprised. Is that your experience?
I wouldn't be that surprised, because I think that you've got 2 families dealing with so many issues, especially when you have a blended family.
Maybe people are on the rebound.
Well, the divorce rate for second marriages is between 60 and 70%, depending on what study you look at. And for each subsequent remarriage, it goes up by 10%. And I think that it's counterintuitive to a lot of people. They say, oh, been there, done that, you have a lot of lessons learned, you should have no problem. But it's the total opposite. On
that note, we're going to have to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask our guests about the pitfalls of remarriage. Stay with us. Welcome back to our discussion of remarriage. I want to ask Paula, what about the wedding? You told us a little bit about your husband's in-laws. Any other issues you need to deal with when it's a second time around?
For the wedding? Yes, and I've actually created an event, which is a remarriage showcase for encore brides. And that event is all about helping people prepare for, commonly asked questions, well, what do I wear to my second wedding? Can I wear the long white dress? I think
if you look at on TV, all the movie stars that have been married 10 times seem to still wear the long white dress. Why shouldn't everybody else?
Right. And I think a very important thing is, how do you include children? 65% of remarriages include children. How do you make this an event and a celebration that includes them? That's really important. It's not just the joining of a bride and a groom. So, can they help with the wedding? Can they help prepare for the wedding? There's this whole talk of family moons where you're going on your honeymoon. We had 5 children between us. We weren't going to farm them off for somewhere for 2 weeks, so we ended up having family moon, which is a
now that I think of it, there was never a honeymoon episode on the Brady Bunch. We never really found out what they did on their honeymoon. But didn't they create another kid?
No, I think they had
well, then we know what they did on their honeymoon. I figured it out. What about you, though, Karina? When you see people who are in a subsequent relationship, they often end up needing a lot of legal advice. For example, discipline issues. A lot of children really resent being told what to do by somebody that they don't think is their real parent.
Absolutely. And that can cause all sorts of ripple effects. It can be that the child decides they don't want to stay with that parent any longer because they don't like the step-parent.
And so custody
and then
could
we've got a
change?
custody and access issue, absolutely. Or we could have a discipline issue where discipline in one household might become so different to the other household, it might become so extreme that we may have child protection issues.
Do you see cases where children are complaining that the step-parent treats them differently than their own? Because, I mean, we all know that many parents who get together the second time around then have their own children.
Oh, absolutely.
Do kids feel that there's favoritism?
Absolutely, and sometimes I wonder whether there really is favoritism in that household or whether they go back to the other household and their biological mother or father questions them about what happens in the new home and maybe makes them feel a little bit awkward or unusual or different.
You know, Paula, that's a big, big issue for us in the legal world. We see parents who are immature and badmouth the other parent and their new partner to the children, and these kids get caught in the middle because they're often going on access visits to the other parent. What advice do you give clients over how to deal with the comments that come back by the children about what happened in the other parent's household?
Well, I'm a big believer that people should be proactive in learning how to deal with step-family dynamics. So my number one piece of advice would be if someone's preparing to remarry and form a step-family, seek out the advice of a professional counselor that has step-family experience, psychologists. There are stepmom coaches, and there are also support groups. Reach out to people that have walked in the shoes before you. So talk to the step-family that has stayed together and the remarried people that have lasted, and learn from them. And that's very helpful when you're trying to get down to the tactical level and say, all right, what do we say when our kids say X, Y, and Z? What do we say
is there a lot of support out there? I thought your website and the service you provide and your book are very, frankly, quite unique.
I think there is more than there used to be. When I was doing the research for my business plan in like '05, if you Googled the word remarriage, you saw very little in the way of support like you're describing. You saw a lot of, you're going to burn in hell if you get divorced kind of language. I've seen a lot more for step families. There's a Stepmom magazine online. And the problem is it's still very difficult to find. We did a survey that said, 67% of people in our poll believed that it was easier to find a diet they can stick to than it was to find remarriage resources.
And I'm wondering about, I know in the legal world this can come up, where the stepchildren don't get along.
Oh, absolutely.
It's really not like the Brady Bunch in a lot of households,
No, not
is it?
at all. I think they have so many factors that may be working against them, especially if the parents themselves do not have a good relationship and can't co-parent from afar. It creates a greater source of contention between these children.
Do you see cases, Karina, where when access visits take place, all the children go?
Yes.
Even if they're not the children of the parent that's having the visit?
Well, what I do see is that parents who have, for example, shared custody, so they'll have a 1 week on and 1 week off schedule, and maybe the other parent or the new step-parent has children from a former relationship that they're sharing with another person. And so I find it to be really interesting how parents try and coordinate schedules, whether it's having all the kids coming at the same time so that the new step-siblings can form a relationship, or having the children coming to their homes at different times so that each parent can spend time with the child alone. It's creating a logistical minefield in trying to figure this out.
It really is. It really is. We are living in a world where a lot of people have a lot of different relationships, and kids are exposed to a whole panoply of adult people. I guess, Paula, really, I mean, no child can have too much love around them.
Yes.
And I guess part of what you do in providing advice deals with the extended family too, the grandparents.
Definitely. There's a lot of sensitivities that they need to be aware of. For example, the classic situation where you're celebrating Christmas or Hanukkah and the biological grandparent may just bring gifts for their biological grandchildren. So a lot of times the remarrying couple has to educate the members of the extended family.
And I think one other factor is that yes, you can't have too much love. I think the source of difficulty comes from different parenting styles or different family styles, as you just said, Paula. So, suddenly a child is introduced to a whole other set of family members, and the way they parent or rear their children are different than the first or the biological set of parents. And that can sometimes be confusing and cause conflicts when that child goes back to their other home and tells the parent what they did.
And what if there's financial disparities? You know, I mean,
Absolutely.
do you get clients come to you saying, I don't think I should have to pay child support anymore?
Oh, sure.
Because my ex is remarried and they've got more money than me.
Absolutely.
How have you found the courts respond to that? I know
well,
the answer.
you would be best to answer that one. I find that it's an interesting area in two scenarios. One, the way that you've said it, and another being that now you've got a new person in your household, and suddenly is their income relevant if you have a child support obligation?
But it creates huge resentment, doesn't it?
It creates huge resentment.
And do you have a tough time explaining the law to people, which is pretty straightforward? You support your kids no matter what.
Absolutely, because parents think, well, if you have a step-parent, that step-parent shouldn't have a responsibility because there's a biological parent out there. Or they think, well, if I have this new person in my life, why should their income be relevant? It's only my responsibility, not theirs.
Right.
You see, it can get complicated. In our next segment, we're going to be talking about the legal pitfalls that people should be aware of. We'll be right back after this break. We are back with our guests in this fascinating topic, remarriage. I want to ask Karina, our resident lawyer here. I think a lot of step-parents seem very surprised to find out that they actually have legal obligations if they treat their stepchildren as their own.
That's right. If you stand in the place of a parent, and that threshold doesn't have to be very high, whether it's the child is living with you and you're contributing towards household expenses, whether you've contributed towards that child's expenses, suddenly step-parents find themselves in the position of having a financial obligation to that child if they separate from that spouse.
But they're always shocked when they find
They're
out.
always shocked. And
it's like the law only works because people don't know about it. I mean, has anyone ever come to you in your career and said, I'm about to move in with this woman, she's got kids, should I let them call me dad? Should I take them to the doctor and be a dad to them? And if I do, what's going to happen to me if we break up?
Absolutely.
You do get clients that ask that?
And sometimes
They're smart.
They don't realize that it's not just about being called dad or being called mom. It's just about living together in a relationship, and sometimes just sharing your resources, that's enough to make you stand in the place of a parent.
But doesn't it put step-parents in a very odd position that you don't want to be mean to the person you've fallen in love with has a child, but it's them you fell in love with, not the child. Right. But you want to be nice and kind, and if you've got a child with that person, then you want to treat them the same. Right. And then if you break up, I tell you in court, it's one of the most astounding things, the look of shock I see on, and it's usually men, men's faces, when they find out that they've got to pay support for a child that they're not seeing anymore. And because they rarely do continue to see them after they break up.
And that they may have to pay child support even when there's a biological parent that's paying child support for that same child.
So it's possible to have custody of children and get child support from more than one mother or father.
Absolutely.
People just can't
They
get
don't
over
understand
that.
that.
They will now because you've just explained it. And that's one of the reasons we have this show. The other thing is change of name. We see a lot of people who say, I don't want my children to have different last names. It's too hard when we travel. It makes them feel different. The schools don't like it. How do you help parents who want to have all the children have the same last name?
Well, there's a few things they can do. We can apply for a change of name, which will invariably result in the biological parent having to be part of that process.
They don't usually like it.
And they don't usually like it.
Is it fair to a child who's maybe 8 years old, Paula, who's had this name, that's their identity, and just because their mom or their dad remarried and they find it convenient that they should have their name changed?
Right. I think that, 8 years old, I don't know what a counselor would say about that, but I think like a teen perhaps would definitely have a say. And while you're on the name topic, it goes beyond just what your legal name is. One of the challenges is, let's say you have the step-grandparents come in for a visit, and what do the kids call them in the house?
Well, what did you suggest? I never even thought of that.
Right.
What would you suggest?
We had an article recently about like what's in a name, and that naming is such a tough thing.
Well, you wouldn't say step grandma, would you?
Well, no. And
Hi, step grandma.
What do you say? And my recommendation is, and I learned this the hard way, have the conversation. The adults should have the conversation before the children are even sitting there with
Well,
them.
tell them, I wouldn't say step grandma because they're going to get a step Christmas present.
Right.
You're far better to show the love.
Right.
And why not? I mean, that's what a family is.
And
Today, that's what a family is.
Right. And what you want to avoid is, having the child stand there awkward, not knowing how to get the other person's attention. And, that's too late. I think the grown-ups should have that conversation and help guide the children so it's not so tough for them.
And I guess all of this has to be discussed very early on, like before you would even move in together, wouldn't it?
Right.
Because these obligations can be formed even if you don't get married.
They can be formed quite quickly if you're living together.
All you have to do is live together for long enough to make a relationship.
That's right. That's right.
And what about adoption?
Well, adoption is also an interesting area because it really does form a much stronger alliance. Suddenly that individual is standing in the place, a real place, and becoming a parent.
The legal parent.
The legal
so you're
parent.
cutting out the
and
biological
you're cutting out
parent.
the biological parent. That's right. And so,
but why do that?
Well, sometimes people want to do that because the biological parent isn't involved at all.
And maybe not paying child support?
And maybe not having access, and maybe has no relationship whatsoever with the child. That's a fairly cut and dry example.
And we do see that a lot, Paula. Parents that come to court saying, the other parent of my child is really not involved, moved away, doesn't pay support, and this child sees the new step-parent as their real parent. And so we get those adoption issues. I just in our remaining moments, I wanted to ask you, what happens if the new relationship breaks up?
Good issues come up. It could be that suddenly the step-parent has formed a relationship with that child and now wants to continue that relationship, and then the question is, what access rights do they have, and are they treated the same way as a parent and have the same access rights, or are they a stranger to this child? And I think each case is going to be different.
It sure is, and I'll tell you, you need assistance from counselors who can help you with these issues. You need legal assistance with the legal advice. You need a good caterer. And you need to watch this show because we cover issues like this. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you both so much. The website is remarriageworks.com. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time on Family Matters.